this list popped up in my feed from CBR.com. Now, CBR.com is a website that deals primarily, their content centers around, well, comic books. Their main focus is around pop culture. So, comic books, manga, anime, and other like nerdy type stuff. So, like Star Wars and then, that kind of stuff. Right. This article popped up in my feed, and the article is called 10 X-Men Villains with Powers That Make No Sense. And this immediately caught my attention because I was a huge fan of the X-Men growing up, right? I haven't read it in years, and there's a lot of catching up to do on my part. There's a lot of catching up to do on my part. But I still remember reading this when I was younger, and I have watched various versions of the animated series, like the one from like the late 90s was good. The one where they were all in high school that was on WB for a while was also really good. There's a really great anime version of this, which is also really good. The animation on that is fucking so crisp. It's beautiful. So this caught my eye, and I've read through the article, and I have some opinions. This article was written by David Harth, and it was published on May 3rd of 2023. The X-Men's villains are some of Marvel's best, but foes like Apocalypse and his many horsemen often have nonsensical powers. The X-Men's villains are a dream squad of antagonists for any team. The X-Men's popularity has partly hinged on just how great their villains are, as their bad guys made their stories that much better. The X-Men are an extremely powerful team, so their enemies have to match that. However, as with many heroes and villains in the Marvel Universe, their powers don't always make much sense. Superpowers can be nonsensical, and the X-Men villains can feel downright absurd at times. Fans are used to suspending disbelief, but some X-Men villains take it too far. They have powers that are physically impossible or simply don't go together. This is the first problem I have with this, is that this sentence here, this sentence fragment here, sort of contradicts itself, right? The fact that they have powers is a thing that's physically impossible, right? But because this is a comic book world, anything is possible. Now, you can say, oh, well, things still need to stick to the laws of physics. Well, do they? Do they really? Saying that powers are physically impossible when discussing comic book universe is kind of silly. Number 10, Abyss. Age of Apocalypse gave Marvel its best 90s story, transforming the X-Men by dropping them into an Apocalypse-controlled alternate universe. As is true in the 616 universe, Apocalypse liked to use horsemen, and the AOA version of the classic group included his son Holocaust, Mr. Sinister, Mikhail Rasputin, and Abyss. Each of the horsemen were quite powerful, but that doesn't mean their powers made sense. Abyss's body is a living portal, and he can unravel his skin to grab foes and pull them inside himself. On top of that, he can also sense fear and make other people afraid. He looks cool, but this mishmash of powers never coheres into anything that makes sense. I disagree. Because Abyss looks like that. Abyss is essentially, as the author has pointed out, a living portal. His body is a series of coils meant to hold that portal together. So it would stand to reason. Also, he doesn't, no one knows where this portal goes. This portal just goes somewhere. So it would stand to reason that because he's not actually a physical being, well, let me rephrase that. It would stand to reason that someone who looks like that would cause fear in people. Right? He's also quite sadistic. He's cruel. He is evil. And it stands to reason that someone standing in the presence of such a person would feel fear, right? Also, the other thing about it is that he's actually able to control the scope of his fear, right? And that sounds a lot to me like other powers in other universes. For example, Haki in the One Piece universe, right? Conqueror's Haki specifically. Conqueror's Haki, which is the ability to overpower the will of others that are weaker than you, right? At least that's my interpretation of it. It's a very simplified version of what Conqueror's Haki is, right? There's a point where Luffy shows up to Fishman Island. He's facing off against the big bad Hody Jones, who has 100,000 fishmen on his side going to go attack the Straw Hats, right? Luffy uses his Conqueror's Haki to knock out 50,000 of them, and you can see the fur that, or the Hody Jones is wearing like this thing that looks like a dog around his neck, and you can see him get goosebumps from that, right? Or you can look at how he used that same power, he being Luffy, used that same power to tame animals by overpowering their will. His ability to make other people afraid seems to fall in line with that. So that makes complete sense when you're a being that's a living portal and there's a very strong sense of wrongness about you. So saying that he looks cool, but that his powers just don't make sense without giving an argument is weak, in my opinion. Holocaust, number 9. Holocaust was Apocalypse's main enforcer among Ensabana's AOA horsemen. However, just like fellow horseman Abyss, he makes no sense. Holocaust was once known as Nemesis, but he was badly injured by Magneto's X-Men. His skin and the muscle were completely burned away, and he was put into a suit of containment armor. Holocaust was essentially a skeleton encased in energy, but was somehow able to survive. He had no organs, and might not have even had a brain. After he made it to the 616 universe, it turned out he didn't even need the containment armor to survive. This is misleading, and here's why. So, first of all, let me explain Holocaust's powers really quickly, because his powers are to absorb energy, right? He's able to absorb the energy of things around him, including life energy. After he was injured by the X-Men, after I think he killed Polaris, I think he killed Polaris and just kind of like left her body for Magneto to find, which is, man, evil dude, like fucking evil guy, right? Basically, they destroyed his physical body. And so when they destroyed most of his physical body, he then became a being of pure energy. Hence why he's just a skull mostly, or what you can see is just a skull. There are no bones inside that suit. What's inside this containment suit is all just energy, right? The reason he has a containment suit is because when he became a being of pure energy, he needed to constantly absorb the life force of those around him in order to keep himself together. Otherwise, he'd just dissipate into nothing. When I say this is misleading, what I mean is it's not entirely accurate to say that he didn't need the suit to survive. Okay, he needed the suit to keep himself together. When they found him in said block of ice, when he was defrosted, he killed several of the people that defrosted him by absorbing their life force. Again, he needs this to keep himself contained. Otherwise, without the suit, he's just going to dissipate into nothing. So yes, he does need the suit to actually survive. Black Tom Cassidy. Black Tom Cassidy first appeared alongside Juggernaut, trying to gain control of Cassidy Keep from the X-Men's Banshee. That's his cousin. He and Jugs were basically inseparable for years. Tom's mutant powers originally allowed him to fire energy blasts through his shillelagh, although he could focus his abilities through any wooden object. However, his powers soon changed completely. Take a look at this picture. This will become relevant in a second. Black Tom went from firing energy blasts through pieces of wood to controlling plant life. As far as upgrades go, it was pretty neat. It's more related to his original power set than some secondary mutations, but it's strange that his power mutated in this direction. Going from laser blast to Swamp Thing adjacent powers is a big leap, and Marvel never really explored how he can make plants grow and speak to them. So I sort of agree with this, in that Marvel never really super explored it. However, he got into a battle, Cable shot him, and so in order to heal his wounds, this wood-like substance was integrated into his body. There's a genetic virus. He carries around a genetic virus that caused all of this nonsense here to basically go out of control. So it stands to reason that as someone who's capable of ligniokinesis, that's where that would go, right? You integrate a substance that's made out of wood, a wood-ish substance, into his body. We're not really told what this wood-ish substance is, but we are told that this virus reacted with it and essentially caused this mutation, this secondary mutation to happen. It's a bit of a stretch to say this part, but if he needs a wooden medium to channel his power, then it would stand to reason that this would just probably be another upgrade of it. But I think what actually happened was the substance that they integrated into his body essentially reacted with his mutant powers and gave him this ability. Again, it's a comic book universe. It doesn't need to be possible in real life. It's a comic book universe. The Sentinels. Oh, the Sentinels. Love these guys. Humans creating mutant hunting machines is a huge part of X-Men history, and the Sentinels are the best known of these genocidal constructs. They range from nanites to massive robotic enforcers, always armed to the teeth. They're most well known for their powerful energy blasts and mutant inhibitor fields that can turn off mutant powers at short range. Mutant inhibiting technology is pretty common for the X-Men's human foes, but it never really makes sense. Mutant powers are incredibly diverse, and a one-size-fits-all solution has never felt right. It gives the X-Men a big problem to overcome, but the fact that the technology never needs to be calibrated to accommodate individual powers makes no sense. Again, disagree. I see where the author's coming from here. Again, very correct. He's very correct here. Mutant powers are incredibly diverse, right? So a one-size-fits-all solution doesn't seem like it makes sense until you look into what causes these mutant powers, and that is for a human to have an X gene. It stands to reason that these mutant inhibitor fields react with the X gene to inhibit its expression, right? We do that in real life through a process known as gene silencing. So, yes, this absolutely makes sense. You don't have to calibrate it to each individual power. You just have to calibrate it to knock out the source. And look no further than the High Evolutionary, who did that from space with a satellite. It's entirely possible. It's been done more than once. And if we're using reality as our measuring stick, it's entirely possible in the real world. Their inhibitor fields are gene silencers, except they're calibrated to work with the X gene. Case closed. The Blob comes in at number 6. Early X-Men comics got strange, and the Blob fit right in. Fred Dukes' powers gave him super strength and made him the proverbial unmovable object by controlling gravity around his body. He was also invulnerable and gained mass, becoming morbidly obese. This is where his powers stopped making sense. This is not technically true. He was already obese. It's part of his physiology. This is why he's the immovable object. He can actually control localized gravity around his body. He doesn't need to move. He won't move if he doesn't want to. With the exception of when he got hit by the Hulk and Juggernaut, because Juggernaut is the literal immovable object. Like, you cannot fuck with Juggernaut. It's the coolest thing ever. Best thing, he's not even a mutant. The only reason to make the Blob obese lay in old school fat phobia. I disagree with that. He could have been large and muscular just as easily. That would have even worked with the pliancy of his skin, as he could suck people into the folds between muscles, turning his Adonis physique beautifully grotesque. The argument here seems to be that making the Blob a fat guy was wrong. Because you could have just easily have made him a Hulk. That's not an argument as to why his powers don't make sense. He was born a fat guy. Those are part of his powers. I don't think there's anything fat phobic about this character. I think that's grasping at straws. And saying something like it would have been he could have just as well have been a large muscly dude. We have many of those. We have a lot of those. There's so many. Like the Hulk is one, Juggernaut's another, Colossus is another, Thanos is another. Like, it's a universe full of big muscly dudes. What's wrong with having a fat guy? He's just a fat dude. And Sabretooth. Sabretooth has a rich history, from his terrible origin to his rivalry with Wolverine to his battles against his arch-enemy in the X-Men. Sabretooth's powers are simple and efficient. He has heightened senses, razor-sharp claws and teeth, enhanced strength, speed, and agility, and a healing factor. His abilities are quite similar to other animalistic mutants, but that doesn't mean it makes sense. Sabretooth's healing factor is the biggest stumbling block. Animals have senses that are better than humans, as well as having sharper teeth and claws. They can be stronger and faster than humans at a base level. However, even salamanders don't have healing factors that allow them to recover from mortal wounds in seconds. Yeah, it's because salamanders are grounded in reality. This is Sabretooth. He's a fictional character. If the argument here is his powers don't make sense because they don't exist in the real world, I got news for you, bud. Like, there's a dude who shoots laser beams out of his eyes. There's a woman who can control the weather. There's a chick who throws fireworks from her fingertips. We could keep going. None of these powers make sense if we're applying the lens of reality. However, Sabretooth's healing factor is accelerated. It's pretty good. It's pretty damn good. Not only is it pretty damn good, he's also been experimented on a bunch. He's been augmented a bunch, a lot, throughout his life, which has made his powers that much stronger, that much better. His whole feral nature, that's not his mutant power. His mutant power is his healing factor, similar to Wolverine.
Okay, editing mix here. So I just wanted to clarify something really quickly. So Sabretooth belongs to a subclass of mutants known as ferals. And even within that subclass, he himself is known as an atavistic feral mutant, simply because he shows animalistic traits. Not all mutants that fall under the term atavistic are actually feral, because there's people like Archangel, who has wings. There's Beast, who just has like fur and claws and such. But those are all atavistic mutants. Sabretooth falls under the category as being an atavistic feral, because he does have more of that wild nature combined with having enhanced senses. The teeth and the claws and his kind of pointy ears are what classify him as being atavistic. So, yeah, just wanted to clarify that real quick. All right, back to the video.
As evidenced by the fact that when the High Evolutionary turned off everyone's powers, Wolverine started to die from adamantium poisoning. Man, he looked rough. Oh my god, he looked rough too. Good lord, he looked rough. Yeah, but another characteristic of Sabretooth's healing factor is that it scales according to damage. Now, I'm not saying that you could cut his head off and he'll just grow a new one back. I'm also not saying that, right? We saw the Deadpool movie. We saw what happened when Deadpool got his hand chopped off, when he got ripped in half. He just... But my point is that Sabretooth's powers scale based on the damage that he takes. So he could potentially tank a headshot from a cannon and be fine. Saying that his powers don't make sense because salamanders can't heal in seconds is fucking bullshit. Mystique. Marvel's core of shapeshifters is formidable, but none can match Mystique's skill and impact on the X-Men. Raven Darkholm has spent several decades as a secret force in the world, using her powers as an assassin and spy. Shapeshifting is an extremely useful ability for someone in Mystique's line of work, allowing her to infiltrate anywhere, as well as slowing her aging and giving her a healing factor. However, shapeshifting is one of those powers that doesn't really make sense at all. The biggest problem with it is where the extra mass comes from when she impersonates a much larger person. Mystique has transformed into large men over the years, and she shouldn't be able to duplicate their sheer bulk and mass just by moving her skin around. She doesn't. As a shapeshifter, as that's what it means. Like, she can change her shape at will. Like, it says so right on the tin, bud. Shapeshifter. But the other thing is, in order to be a shapeshifter, you have to have control over your body at a molecular level, right? Because you're basically moving parts around. An interesting fact about Mystique is that she doesn't actually weigh the same as whoever she impersonates. She just looks like them and, to a point, can imitate their powers. But she doesn't weigh the same. She doesn't have the same mass. She just has the same shape. Because she's a shapeshifter, you see. I can see where you're coming from, like where the extra mass comes from. But given that she's just changing her shape, that it makes sense. She's not adding bulk to herself. She's just turning into someone else. Famine comes in at number 3. There have been multiple famines over the years, usually with a variation of the same wasting ability that replicates starvation and makes people weak. It's strange enough that there are multiple mutants with this power, but the most interesting and nonsensical variation is the famine of the Final Horseman. Jeb Lee was a Civil War era veteran whose mutant gifts gave him the ability to give people bio-auditory cancer. This famine usually uses a drum to manifest his powers, but he can even just tap his fingers to condemn people to a slow death. The cancer eats away at people, which makes sense. But the fact that sound transmits the illness feels absurd. It's a cool power, but it doesn't really make any sense. This entry, I actually agree with. I cannot, for the life of me, fathom a feasible explanation as to how sound can transmit this illness. The biggest stretch I can take is that maybe perhaps like the vibration of the sound of the drum reacts with the body in some way to trigger a reaction, but like that's a stretch. I don't have a common sense answer for this. No, there's no good explanation for this. There's absolutely no good explanation for this at all. So even the creators don't really have an explanation as to how this power works. So like this entry right here, spot on, my man, spot on. This makes zero sense to me. Apocalypse comes in at number 2. Apocalypse is so powerful, he's conquered the world in several alternate universes and futures. He's super strong and invulnerable, can completely control his molecular structure, has powerful psionic abilities, and can manipulate energy. All of that is enhanced by celestial technology, which also gives him impregnable armor. Apocalypse has an amazing power set, but his energy and psionic abilities don't really make much sense. Super strength, invulnerability, and personal molecular control reinforce each other intuitively. His mental powers and energy manipulation give him a chance against the X-Men's diverse lineup, but they don't fit in with his purely physical abilities. That's mostly because his abilities aren't purely physical. They've never been purely physical. Apocalypse is a god. Like, he's not even the first one to hold a title. Like, Apocalypse is a title. He's not even the first one to hold said title. But he's also been implanted by this thing called the Death Seed from the Celestials, right? That is irrelevant. It's just a piece of... It's irrelevant. It's a piece of lore I found out while kind of reading up on these characters, right? But Apocalypse is essentially a god. And no more is this evident in one of his powers, where he can legitimately give himself any power he wants. Apocalypse is essentially the rough draft for All for One from My Hero Academia. He could give himself whatever powers he wants as he sees fit. It's a stupidly broken ability. It is plot armor of the highest device. I don't like this argument. I don't like this argument because this argument implies that a character has to be one thing specifically. Saying something like, yeah, super strength and vulnerability, personal molecular control reinforce each other. That's absolutely true. I absolutely agree with that. But saying that his energy manipulation and mental powers don't fit in because his abilities are purely physical, that's limiting a character. And that shows a limited imagination, right? I think that it's entirely possible for a character to have multiple powers that don't necessarily line up together. But like the reason why Apocalypse has all these powers is because he can give himself these powers. Because he's a god. That is the end of the story. He's a god. He can do as he pleases. Within some limits. And number 1, Sebastian Shaw. Sebastian Shaw is a longtime X-Men villain. He's been the Black King of the Hellfire Club for ages, and he's run Shaw Industries, a technology company that he created, making a fortune. Like, he was a millionaire by 30, he was a billionaire by 40. Yo, my man, got it like that. He's currently a member of Krakoa's Quiet Council and helps run the Hellfire Trading Company. His mutant powers make him quite formidable in combat. Every time he's hit, he can convert kinetic energy from the blow into strength, making him stronger with every blow. This is a weird power. It would work better if he was converting the kinetic energy to another type of energy, but somehow storing it in his muscle tissue is nonsensical. It's definitely made him hard for X-Men like Colossus to overcome, but it's also way too strange to work. But you've explained how his power works. He absorbs the energy from every blow and redirects it as like it. He absorbs the energy from every blow and it makes him stronger. He used to have a limit to this power. He doesn't anymore, but there's a guy named Strong Guy who does exactly the same thing. Bishop does the same thing. Granted, I know these guys aren't villains, but like my point is that there are multiple characters who do some variation of this power. Right? The argument here seems to be this doesn't make sense because it's too strange to work, because it's nonsensical that he's storing energy in his muscles. Why is this nonsensical? Sebastian Shaw is essentially a tank. This is what his body does. I see no difference between what he's doing and what Vegeta does in his Ultra Ego form. The more damage he takes, the stronger he gets. It's perfectly normal for a body to be able to absorb energy. All he's doing is absorbing it and then using it. What doesn't make sense about that? Essentially, a lot of my issue with this list is that, for the most part, there's been no real explanation as to why these powers don't make sense, right? Even in the case of Jeb Lee, famine, that's the strongest argument for why something doesn't make sense, right? The argument with Black Tom Cassidy also made sense, but I think that may also be because the author might not have known about that crazy wood implantation, that wood implant that he has, and like the genetic disease that he has that like completely screwed everything up and threw everything through a wrench in all the works. I think I would have liked to have seen this article give more strong arguments as to why these powers don't make sense, outside of I just don't get it, it would work better if, and just because. CBR has a great collection of articles, great collection of lists, and is definitely a resource on the internet for nerd culture. But articles like this are clickbaity at best. And I understand that a lot of websites, right, who specialize need things like that to drive traffic to their website, right? And I'm not faulting them for doing that. What I'm saying is this particular list struck a nerve with me because there's so many holes in it that you could fill if the author just read into these characters a little bit more. That's all.